The country's reading crisis among learners persists, with a Rhodes University study painting a very bleak picture. The study reveals that South African learners continue to perform poorly in both international and local assessments when it comes to reading for comprehension. For more on this study, I am now joined by the author of it, Dr. Tracy Kichen, from the Center for Higher Education Research, Teaching and Learning at Rhodes University. Dr. Kichen, thank you so much for joining us this evening, and a very good evening to you. Firstly, well done on this research, as well as shocking as it is, very important. Please tell us a little bit about these findings from your study.
Great. Thank you very much for having me, Masa. Good evening to everybody. Just to give a little bit of context into this study, I'm sure that a lot of your viewers will know that we're sitting at about 81% of learners at grade 4, at the grade 4 level, who cannot read for meaning. And what this means essentially is that while they can identify words and be able to spell them out, they might not be able to understand it in the context of what they're reading. And this is really problematic. We've also seen that this has been a big increase from previous years. And this comes from a study called the Progress in International Reading Literacy Study, the PIL study. It's conducted every 5 years, which kind of just benchmarks the reading comprehension skills for learners in grade 4. So my research, I wanted to look a little bit more in depth into this crisis, this literacy crisis. And I conducted a study at a local Eastern Cape school. It is a formal Model C school. The research itself was only conducted in one classroom. So while the results might not be entirely generalizable, I think that there's some really important implications for reading comprehension more generally.
Yeah, and also just speaking about the context that also led to your study as well, you know, when you speak about that 81% of grade 4 learners who cannot read for meaning as well, Dr. Kichen, what actually happens to those grade 4 learners? I mean, do they progress with a very low pass rate and make it up to matric? And then what kind of a young adults do they become? What options are open to them?
Well, these effects have a long and, lingering effects in their education. They can end up being at university with very low marks. They can progress through. What was really important in my study was that it seems that there may be a false sense of success in what's going on in the classroom. And this was because of a disconnect between the curriculum policy and what was actually happening in classroom practice, which meant that in my study, the learners were actually, they were achieving results that seemed that they were doing really well, but in fact, they were being tested on very literal, so very low order thinking and reading skills. And this is really problematic, especially if learners are being led to believe, or, if they think that they are actually doing a lot better than what they are in reading comprehension.
And that was one of your main findings as well there, that the kinds of questions that learners should be asked were different from what they were being actually asked.
Absolutely. So the curriculum policy, the CAPS document, it really prescribes a set of question types that learners should be assessed on for any comprehension task. And for the teachers in your audience, they probably would have heard of Bloom's taxonomy. Now, for reading comprehension, the CAPS document relies on a taxonomy called Barrett's taxonomy of reading comprehension. And what this taxonomy does is it distinguishes between different levels of cognitive ability. So, thinking and reading skills. It could either be very literal, so very explicit meaning, just being able to identify something in the text. And it becomes increasingly more complex. So eventually learners are expected to be able to infer meaning that might not be as easily retrieved, and then apply it to other situations. And in the CAPS document, these levels are supposed to be tested in a fairly balanced way. So there should be about 40% of the questions being very literal, so fairly easy, easily accessible. 40% of them should be kind of middle to higher order questions. So this is where you're looking at your meaning that's not easily accessible. And 20% should be your higher order thinking. But what I found in my study was that the text that was being used, and what's very important to know, is that this text was taken from a document or from a textbook that was seen as caps aligned. So it should have been representative of what was in caps. And what I found was that the questions in this book were not matching up with the CAPS requirements at all. So instead, we had about 73% of the questions being very, very literal, only 20% of them being middle order questions, and only 7% higher order questions. And to just give you an example, this comprehension text that I looked at was out of 15 marks in total. 6 of those marks were dedicated to learners just naming animals that they found in the story. That's almost 50% of marks that are being given just for identifying very explicit information. And this is what led to, the kind of perhaps false sense of success, is that they were doing very well, but they were being tested at a very low level. And this is problematic.
What's the root problem of this? Who's setting these tests? And are they the ones who are accountable for this false sense of success then?
I think that there are a lot of contributing factors. I mean, we can't pinpoint one thing and say, that is it. In my study specifically, I mean, there was a lot going on at the time, and that all bears on the context and, how things play out. Firstly, it was done during COVID-19. So there was an immense amount of pressure on teachers, to get through the curriculum and get through everything. We're also still in an education system that bears, some of the scars of an apartheid system, and a curriculum that itself is, it's undergone a lot of revisions, and it doesn't really give a lot of support for teachers. But at the moment, I think part of the problem is that the textbooks that are the resources that are being produced might not necessarily be in alignment with the curriculum policy. So that is something that is really important to know.
What would part of the solutions be? Would it be in different textbooks? Would that be on the education department and government, to ensure that we are ensuring we're getting different kinds of textbooks that give the curriculum that will enable these kinds of skills that are lacking right now? And what other solutions would you say there'd be?
Yeah, I think that there need to be solutions at every level. I mean, we need resources that are correct, and that are in alignment with our policies. Our policies need to be more supportive for the teachers. But I think that the best way, or a very good starting point, would be to give more support and training to our teachers, so that they can recognize, in these resources, because even if we change the resources, not all of the schools in South Africa are going to have access to them. So it may be worth actually training our teachers to be able to understand what is needed, to look at a text, identify the kinds of meanings that are available in the text, what they should be looking for, and if there are mismatches and gaps, to be able to revise those themselves. So I think that, we need a lot of work on a lot of different levels, but definitely a lot more support for our teachers, and some training in being able to make sure that they know what to teach and how to teach it, and find ways of filling those gaps while we wait, for more work that can be done at the resource level.
Support and training. Dr. Tracy Kichen, thank you so much for your time, and of course that study that you have conducted too. Wishing you all the best.